On this episode of Calgary in Depth, I'm very happy to be here with a wonderful friend of mine, Sue Glanville. We've known each other for many years, and we're here at the Shaughnessy Library in one of their newly renovated meeting rooms. It's wonderful now that the library's reopened. We have these meeting rooms we can book, and if you haven't been to the Shaughnessy Library, it's connected to the YMCA and the Bishop O'Byrne High School, so it's all under one roof here. Wonderful resources, and that's something that we're going to talk about today, among other things, is about the kinds of resources that Calgary has. And so thank you so much for being here with me, Sue.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Well, let's let people know. We've known each other for about, I think, 25 years now.
Yes.
Can you believe it?
Yes, more than 2 decades. It's really something.
More than 2 decades, yeah. Now, your family has gone through an experience and continues to have some experiences that perhaps not a lot of people can relate to, but I think it would be really interesting to hear about what you have been going through with your youngest son, Eddie. Can you take me back to what happened a few years ago and how it changed your lives?
Absolutely. So we're almost reaching the 5-year anniversary mark of when my son, Eddie, who is now 7, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor at the age of 2. So it was a total shock to our family. In retrospect, I can see certain signs, but at the time, we just saw some health problems, and then we were getting them checked out, and suddenly it was recommended to us to go to the Children's Hospital immediately to get it checked out to emergency. So we did that, and this was on January 11th, 2018, and when we went to the Children's, they asked us to do a CT scan. They asked us for our permission, and I'm talking about my husband and I, who were both there with him, and we agreed just to rule out anything very serious, and we were shocked when the results came back that he had a brain tumor.
Right, and so, as you said, Eddie was 2 years old, and then you have an older son.
He was 6.
And both perfectly normal, healthy children.
That's what we thought.
And the first symptoms you noticed, understand that was his. Well, you tell me. What were the first things you noticed that something seemed to be a little off with Eddie?
The first things I noticed had to do with his balance.
Yeah.
So he was 2.5 at the time of diagnosis, and
right.
He was walking. And then he went from walking to crawling everywhere. And we didn't understand that. Like, he had reached that milestone. And then he started crawling again, and he started becoming unsteady on his feet. When he would stand up and reach for things, he would fall over. Also, he had been eating a variety of foods, and then he started sticking to favorites. He didn't want that range of foods anymore. And another thing I remember is that he started having more temper tantrums. He would just scream. And we didn't know why, but my husband, Pete, and I thought it was the terrible twos. But in retrospect, it was probably that he was in pain, having headaches, things like that.
Right. And so you went to your family doctor, described these symptoms, and if I'm correct, your doctor said he needs to be immediately brought to the hospital for scans. Is that correct?
Not quite.
Okay.
We went to our family doctor maybe a month before he was diagnosed with a brain tumor, just saying some of these funny things are happening. Not funny things, but some of the things I just described to you.
Yes.
In terms of symptoms of something being wrong. And the doctor agreed, I think there's something going on here, but I don't quite know what it is, so I'm going to make an immediate referral to a pediatrician. And that was put through. And when we went to the pediatrician, that would have been January 10th. My son was diagnosed on the 11th. I remember sitting through this really long assessment, like just tons of questions. And it was in the evening, and we were tired. And after this, we just kind of left and went home. And my husband, Pete, got a phone call we didn't really hear anything from them at the time. We expected them to follow up with us shortly after.
Yes.
And we just kind of went home. And my husband, Pete, got a call from them later at night, and someone at the office, maybe it was the doctor, was telling him, actually, another symptom I should mention, and this is a very important one, is Eddie started vomiting in the week before he was diagnosed. So he would wake up in the morning and he would vomit, and then it seemed like the rest of the day would go fine. And that happened a few times. So we weren't sure why that was going on. And anyway, when my husband got the call from a pediatrician the night of the 10th, they said if he vomits one more time, take him to emergency. It could be pressure on the brain. And that was the first thing that really got me. I was actually deeply afraid at that point, but I don't think I acknowledged it.
Yes.
Because all of a sudden I got thinking, what do they mean, pressure on the brain? And then we went to bed, and then early the next morning, Eddie vomited again. And I called Pete at work, and I said, we need to go to the children's. And my mom and brother came to our place, and they watched our older son. And Pete and I took Eddie to the children's, where he was diagnosed.
Mm-hmm. And if I believe you've told me before that it was a 5-centimeter tumor that they said that he had?
Honestly, I don't remember sitting here right now, which might seem like a funny thing for a mom to say.
Yeah.
That, that detail might really stand out. But honestly, sitting here right now, I can't remember the exact length, but I do know it was a larger tumor.
Right.
And I do know they said they needed to remove it immediately.
Immediately, yeah.
So basically, we got the news of the diagnosis on January 11th, 2018, and they said they needed to remove it right away, and the surgery was scheduled for the next day.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and you can imagine, as I know you're a parent,
yes,
all of a sudden receiving that news, and it's like the bottom falls out, and it's like honestly a free fall. And I might get emotional during our conversation, because I am remembering what that was like to receive that news, and to have what I thought was a healthy 2-year-old. Like I said, in retrospect, I can see the signs, but Pete and I were even wondering, does he have an inner ear infection? Just questions that were totally off. And we had been taking him to our family doctor, who also didn't know what the problem was, until we did get the confirmation of the brain tumor with the CT scan. So all of a sudden we received that news, and there was a doctor who came into the room and said to us, and he was a very kind man, and he said to us, has anyone told you? And that was a big alarm bell in our heads, and we said, told us what? He said, have you seen the pictures? Pictures of, what are you talking about? And that's when he said he has a brain tumor. And then all of a sudden, the reality is hitting, and because it's such a shock, it doesn't sink in. So he kept talking about having a tumor, and I said, do you mean he has brain cancer? And the doctor said yes. And then he was talking in a way that I found very comforting. He had his own experience with cancer, and he was talking to us about what was coming next, that we were going to get this team of doctors, and that Eddie might do trials, and that we would fight this disease. And I was listening, and all of a sudden Pete said, do you mind if we have some time alone? And the doctor said, yes, no problem, left the room. And that's when Pete and I took in the news, the two of us together, and reacted very emotionally. But that time is a blur.
Yes.
It was a lot of people suddenly coming in the room, telling us a lot of information that honestly didn't sink in. The only thing that was going through my head is that my son had cancer, and was he going to be okay? Was he going to live? So I will say that the children's hospital, it's never a place that you want to be. No one ever says, hey, let's go and have a child who's not well. But it is a wonderful place. There are absolutely wonderful people there. And when we got that diagnosis, they took all the time with us in the world. And that's everyone, from, the brain surgeon to the nurses to everybody, took all the time with us in the world, answered questions, comforted us. There were social workers. And I remember all these people coming in the room telling us things. And it was like a revolving door and trying to take it all in. And it's a worst fear of any parents.
Absolutely. As you said, the surgery happened immediately the next day. And did they prepare you, did they say, almost certainly this will be the outcome, your son's behavior and cognitive abilities will change? Did they tell you that, or was it more just let's wait and see? Let's just wait and see, and they didn't want to paint any pictures of possibilities?
I remember one of my main questions at the time is he going to be okay? That's what I kept asking. Is he going to be okay? Can we deal with this? I just wanted to know he was going to live, because I knew there was a risk of cancer taking his life, and that was my worst fear. And that was what was, I think, when fight or flight is going on, a tunnel vision develops. And all I wanted to know was he going to be okay? So I just kept asking that question in a variety of ways to a variety of people. And I was assured that no lives had been lost from this particular surgery by this particular surgeon, but that there were a lot of questions, because we weren't even going to know the nature of the cancer, how serious it was, until the tumor was removed and they could study it. And that was going to take, I'm trying to remember back now, but even a week or two to get the results.
Right.
Because they need to remove the tumor, as much of it as they could.
Yes.
And after they had done that, they would need to analyze it and see the nature of the cancer, like how aggressive it was, that kind of a thing.
Yes.
And then be able to tell us more about the prognosis. So at that point, there was a lot of unknowns, but I do remember at that time being more concerned about whether he would live, and not really thinking about the larger questions I deal with now, because he has been in remission for 4 years, and we've been told that it's likely the cancer will never come back. And I have a degree of safety from that. I know no one's ever going to give us 100% guarantee, but I feel much better about things than I did at the point I'm describing. And now I ask more questions about quality of life, because my son Eddie does have several severe disabilities as a result of the treatment and the tumor, but he's in good health. But at the time, we really didn't know a lot. Yes. About what would come next. It was a very scary time. And of course, we received the news one day, the surgery was the next. Eddie went immediately from the surgery to ICU, which I don't think was unexpected after the nature of this kind of surgery. But I remember he wasn't waking up. And that was a very hard period of time. They had a room at the Children's close to ICU where Pete and I could stay while all of this was going on. And we actually we moved into the hospital. They created spaces for us as parents. We could be there with him. And then, like I said, with our older child, he was taken care of by my mom and brother for about the first week. And Pete and I were just at the hospital, and day blends into night blends into day, and it's a constant vigil. Right.
And as you said, they said they were going to remove as much of the tumor as possible. And how much were they able to remove? Did they tell you?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the percentage.
I believe at the time, you told me it was 95%.
That seems a little high to
me.
Okay. I could be wrong, but they didn't get all of it. They got most of it.
They got most of it.
And they just weren't able to remove the, entire tumor safely, but they got as much of it as they could, and it was the majority of it. But it was a sinking feeling as a parent to hear, we got as much of it as we could, but it's still there, like it's still a threat. And then we needed to walk through the next steps, which involved Eddie being in the ICU, not waking up for a while, like just day after day, he's in that ICU bed, all hooked up to a lot of things.
And just so I understand, he wasn't waking up not because of medication where it was intentional that he wasn't waking up because he's healing, but that they didn't know exactly when he would wake up?
Yeah, like he needed to recover from this major surgery.
And people wake up at various times.
Yeah,
like
and it
varies.
was about when he would regain consciousness. And I remember a time, too, when he was in the ICU where they had a breathing apparatus to help him breathe, and there was a point where they took that out, and then there was a big concern that he would start to breathe on his own, that his body would start. And I remember being in the room when that happened and seeing that click in, that he started to breathe on his own. And then from there, he did at some point regain consciousness. And but things were different than they had been before. I mean, I remember what I thought was a typical 2.5-year-old, and then all of a sudden he has this surgery, and then he did, maybe a week or so after he had the surgery, regain consciousness and start to come back. But it was different. He had lost so many of his functions, and he's made a lot of progress since that point over the years, but he experienced something called mutism, which 30% of patients who go through this kind of brain surgery experience. And it's just a kind of severe loss in terms of speech and movement and the ability to eat. And I remember when he did first wake up, he had a lot of words before he had the surgery, and he lost his words. He didn't have any words. Actually, that's not true. When he first woke up, he said a couple of words. And then he didn't speak again. And then the first word that came back was mommy.
I was guessing you were going to say that.
Yeah. I don't forget that.
No, you wouldn't forget that.
Yeah. And he would call it out.
Oh, wow. And the amount of disruption to your life is like hard to, I probably even describe or imagine for most people, because you're very lucky that you had your mother and brother here, as you mentioned, who were able to take care of your older son, Luke, that first week, especially, but obviously many times after as well. But both of you were working, and you both had to inform your employers that for the foreseeable future, you're not available, and you have to just focus on your child, right?
Yeah.
So as a practical matter, what did you have to put in place in order to adjust to this new life at the hospital? Because it ended up being, 6 months, was it? 8 months?
January to August.
Where the two of you were basically living at the hospital on separate shifts, and you'd see each other briefly as you took your turn, past, as you took over the shift, and Pete would end his shift at the hospital, right? Yes,
we ended up taking turns living at the hospital. We did have our 6-year-old at home who was attending grade 1. So how we worked it is one of us would essentially be at the hospital for half the week, and then the other would switch for the other half, and we would go in between our home and the hospital. But when you talk about some of these practical arrangements, in some ways, they were some of the easiest things to do. It's amazing what can happen when something this powerful occurs. Yeah. And when there's a great degree of kindness and understanding surrounding it. So I haven't been through this kind of an experience before, so maybe it surprised me at the time just how willing people were to accommodate. Pete and I are very blessed with our family and our friends and our workplaces, and how willing they were when we told them the truth of the situation to obviously not expect us to attend work and to make arrangements on our behalf. There were a lot of people working very hard at the time to sort out certain practical matters so that Pete and I could focus on what was really important. And I have no doubt that many people were inconvenienced, and there were sudden things that needed to happen so that Pete and I could focus our energy at the hospital and on our other son. But people really bent over backwards to support us and help us on this journey. And that includes the entire hospital community and our family and our friends. So you mentioned my mom and brother. Pete also has family members who were very supportive. His mom, he has 2 sisters, and we have many friends who stepped up in a big way, just big ways and small ways. And I wouldn't wish this journey on anyone. It's horrific, particularly the places where you just don't know But if you have to make this kind of a journey, we're very blessed to have had the people who accompanied us during the way. I have seen the best in people, and that's been an ongoing gift that I feel Eddie has given me from the time of diagnosis to now. I see the best in people who have reached out with so much kindness, and those practical matters, they can be such a headache, and we certainly did all of our experiences weren't golden. There are a few that are suddenly springing to mind where it was a pretty frustrating experience where perhaps I did wish someone had understood that didn't. But on the whole, things like, I remember when we started living at the hospital, we needed to get a parking pass. And I was trying to figure this out because I didn't want us to get a ticket. And I was bringing this up with the social worker that I had newly met. And she was saying to me, "Don't worry about it." And I thought in my mind, okay, well, that's nice. You're telling me don't worry about it. But this is something I do need to worry about. I need to sort this matter out. I realize I have just learned I have a child with cancer, but I need to worry about this. I need to just take care of this so this detail is taken care of, and then I can move on with focusing on what's most important here. And she said, there is a charity that covers parking passes for families. So there were a lot of things like that. And then you brought up our employers earlier, and we both had very understanding employers who said, do what you got to do, essentially, and we will make the adjustments here. And Pete and I were fortunate. We were able to make a transition from working to, we have insurance, and we were able to access some funds from our insurance companies due to mental health disability, because, it's a really traumatic experience to go through. So never mind that we needed to be at the hospital ensuring that our child was okay, but also mentally it takes a big toll, and there was no way either of us could have shown up to work in those months. We wouldn't have been present in any sense. So anyway, we did have our income covered for that period of time, and not everybody does. And there were just ways to do it that I never would have guessed beforehand.
So, as you said, it was January to August, 8 months. What was the routine like? You mentioned, of course, the half a week for that you were at the hospital, half a week that Pete was there. But at the hospital, what kinds of things were you doing? And I think hospitals are not nice places to be. I'm fortunate not to have had to spend a lot of times in hospitals, but when I have, it's terribly sad to see other people suffering, especially other children. It was hard. When we would visit you guys there, it was hard to see what you were going through, but also hard to see the other children, because of course there are children all over the place there who are going through incredible challenges so bravely. What was that environment like, and how were you spending your days those 8 months?
I remember you and Sylvia coming to the hospital. And that's one of the special memories that Pete and I have in our hearts from that time. Friends coming and seeing us and spending time with us. And
we just wanted to do anything we could. I remember we brought food a few times, and just some toys, I think, just whatever we could think of. But we felt like whatever we did was not sufficient. Like, I just wished we could do more. I've gotten that feedback from a lot of people. We wish we could do more. I think the reality is we would all love to cure cancer. Yeah. We would all love to take the pain away, and it's just not a reality. Everyone's working for that. Doctors, nurses, friends, family. Everyone just wants to help the family, help the child, help the family. But I do think it's important for people who show up, for people who connect, for people who do what they can to realize how
precious that is for families, and how it does give you that sense of connection during a very fearful and difficult time. I would say that's what got our family through that time is mainly friends and family and the hospital community that I just didn't know existed until Eddie was diagnosed. All of a sudden we had all these people introducing themselves to us, and it was hard to keep track of them at first, and I didn't understand the key roles they would play in our lives, a lot of them. But they became like a hospital family to us. So when you're asking about the routine of the hospital, firstly, I would say there is no routine. It's just whatever is happening that day, and go, and doctors coming in. And generally what happened was Eddie had the brain surgery I was talking about earlier, and then recovered in ICU, and shortly after that was moved to a unit in the hospital that deals specifically with children who have cancer. And he did chemo there. So because they didn't get the whole tumor, we needed to pursue more treatments. And for Eddie, what was set out for him was 6 months of chemo. So two 3-month rounds. And then he had a stem cell transplant. They used his own stem cells during the second round of chemo. And finally we were discharged when he was well enough to come home. But he needed to do all of that chemo and the stem cell transplants as part of his treatment, and we were discharged. So you're asking about the routine of the day. It's really, hospital life is crazy. Like, just his medical situation was very serious. So each day it was about trying to stay on top of it and working with, doctors and nurses and the team in terms of what was going on. And, certainly during the chemo, he was regularly getting this medicine designed to kill the tumor, which then had serious effects on Eddie. He was very sick most of the time. And, he would recover, and then there'd be another round of, another dose with the medicine. And it was just riding it.
Yeah.
He was just very sick during that time. There was no routine to the day.
Right.
And it was just, as a parent, trying to help him as much as possible. Like, you can imagine your own child when they're really seriously ill. It's trying to help them through it.
Right.
Each day.
And just because people maybe don't have any experience of this, but when you say very sick, I think maybe people generally understand that if you have chemotherapy and you're taking these various drugs, that it causes you to vomit. You get nauseous and you vomit. And when you have a small child that doesn't know that they need to turn onto their side,
yes.
and especially if they've had a surgery that affects their motor abilities, it means that swallowing and breathing already is a concern. But when you add to that the potential of someone vomiting, it's even hazards of choking are even greater concern. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So you have to constantly watch that issue.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I mentioned when he did wake up in the ICU, he had lost his ability to speak. He couldn't really, he couldn't sit up, he couldn't roll over, he needed to have a feeding tube, he couldn't eat. So there was a lot of things he just needed help with doing, and like you just said, he needed to be watched more closely when he was ill, because he would need more assistance than a typical child would. I will say, in the midst of all of this, actually, when you ask about routine, we did have family and friends kind of coming by at different times. My husband and I even managed to get out a couple of times to a restaurant and have lunch or something along those lines. My mom and brother, on Saturdays, they would bring Luke. And I mean, the Children's Hospital, if you've been there, is a very family-friendly place. They have video games and, fish tanks and just areas set up for kids that they can really enjoy. So Luke would come and, Luke would come to the hospital and go to the cafeteria and get a burger or chicken fingers and spend some time at the hospital, would see his brother. My mom and brother would spend some time with Eddie, and sometimes Pete and I could get out at that point. And then, we would switch off. I will say as well that Luke had regular sleepovers with my mom and brother at that time, where I would stay over with him. And Eddie had physio. Eddie had physio at the hospital. He had speech therapy, and they would come at regular times. And it was always a pleasure to see the therapists. They would engage with Eddie and play games with him. It wasn't, some boring therapy designed for adults. Like physio would come in and have like a basketball net and encourage him to use those muscles, and speech would come in and have some books and things like, so they would play with him. And there was a music therapist who was wonderful, and he would come in with different instruments and we could play music. I remember the music therapist saying to me, some families have trouble being here for a few days, and you guys have been here for months. You're doing well. But it felt like a slog. It felt like a slog. We were always tired, but certainly knew we had a good reason for being there, and were thankful that we were allowed to stay.
Yeah. So August 2018, right?
Yeah.
Am I correct? So it was 8 months after the initial diagnosis and surgery, you're allowed to go home. What was that transition like, and what kinds of supports did you need to have in place when you first took Eddie home?
It was a crazy transition, because we went from being embedded in this hospital life to all of a sudden being on our own. And there wasn't too much of a transition to that. So I remember feeling super connected at the hospital. Like I mentioned, we had the doctors and the nurses and the therapists. There was a social worker. There was a spiritual advisor who would talk to anyone of any faith or no faith, just about where they were at spiritually with what was going on. And we had great conversations. So there was this community there, and we were really looking forward to the date of discharge. And I think in light of what it meant, Eddie was well enough to come home. But when we came home, it was a shock, because then we needed to manage all of this on our own, and we needed to line up care for Eddie at home. It was too much for Pete and I to manage, just a level of home care that was needed for him. And we wanted to also arrange an educational opportunity for Eddie. He was, at that time, his birthday is in September, so he would have been turning 3. And, he'd done rehab in the hospital, and we wanted to keep up with his learning. So I remember having a feeling at that time, leaving the hospital, that, we had been told by various doctors that they didn't know what was likely to happen in regards to how far Eddie could progress. He did have, as I mentioned, he does have disabilities, but they said there was, no limit in terms of regaining some of his abilities. So I was really motivated at the time to try and get as much rehab in as I could. And as a parent, I wanted to give Eddie every opportunity to regain his abilities, and, let's do everything we can, kind of a thing. So there was an at-home schooling program, and we arranged for that. There was someone who came to our home and did learning with Eddie, kind of where he was at, as far as like a preschool type program goes, one-on-one. So we started with some of that, but it was pretty chaotic, that hospital to home transition. Although we were happy to make it. We were happy to be together as a family. Again, we had been separated those months, and that was tough. So we were happy to come home as a family. But I gotta say, leaving the hospital was not carefree in any sense. Eddie had an MRI leading up to him leaving the hospital, and that was kind of supposed to tell us where he was at with things. And what it told us was there was something in the picture of the brain, and our oncologist told us she didn't know what it was. So we didn't know whether we were leaving the hospital with Eddie still having cancer, or whether they couldn't see any cancer in the picture. It was inconclusive. And Pete and I weren't expecting that. We were expecting an answer either way, like either, the picture isn't showing anything or we're seeing something. So we left the hospital with this information that they're seeing something in the picture, but they don't know whether it's cancer or not. And we needed to follow up with them maybe in the next couple of weeks or so and make a plan around next steps. So we left the hospital not knowing the status of Eddie's health, and that was very stressful. But we did bring him home. We were happy to be reunited as a family. It was chaotic, but slowly we did find our way and, building towards our new normal, which I would say we're still finding, even 5 years later. Still finding ways to adapt and have a happy, healthy, balanced family life, which I suppose all families are a work in progress as far as that goes. But our family, we deal with special needs, so that's the journey we're on.
And how soon after the surgery did they let you know that Eddie would always need some form of support?
No one has ever had that conversation with us.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no one has ever sat down with us and said, this is always, he will always need some kind of support.
And is that because of what you said earlier about how there is no theoretical limit to the amount of ability that he can regain, that they wouldn't want to say he'll never regain this, he'll never regain that, because they don't know how much he can regain. Is that fair to say? Or
yeah,
okay.
I mean, I think no one can give us 100% certainty that he will always be at a certain level. So we've never received that information. I mean, I know as a parent early on, I wanted certainties. I wanted to know, for example, that he was going to live. For sure. I wanted to know that he was going to regain his abilities, and the further along I've gone with this, the more comfortable I've had to become with some ambiguity. But I would say that there's a good chance a lot of his disabilities are lifelong, just from what I've gathered from various professionals. But I also would not put a ceiling on him.
Right, of course.
I do believe in miraculous things happening.
Yes.
And what I see, from Eddie every day is miraculous in terms of the progress one sees as a parent when I know him very well, and all of a sudden I see him doing something differently. Like the other day, yesterday, I took him to the Children's for an audiology appointment. One of the side effects of the chemo was that he lost some of his hearing, and that's a permanent disability. He needs to wear hearing aids for the rest of his life. And I took him to a hearing appointment yesterday, and they had a chair and a table set up, and they had some hearing games so that he would sit on this chair, and when he heard a sound, one of the games, for example, is he had to put a stone in the container every time he heard a sound. And he would wait and he would listen for the sound, and then he'd put the stone in the container. So as a parent, I'm standing back and watching this and seeing not only is he sitting in that chair, which doesn't have a lot of support, so he's showing some good core strength. He's keeping himself balanced. He's able to sit in this child's chair for a long period of time, and he's able to listen and follow the instructions and put the stone in the bucket when he hears the sound. And this is tremendous that he can do this today, that he's gotten to that point.
And so he was 2.5 at the time of the surgery. He turned 7 then, I guess, this past September?
Yes.
And so since obviously people can't see him and interact with him here, and can you paint more of a picture of what Eddie's abilities are right now and the things that you need to do for him?
Yes.
And how much is he able to speak, and how does he communicate, what his mobility is like, and what you have, like he has a chair that you use, right?
Yes, and he has a wheelchair.
Right. That's what I meant, sorry,
Yes.
wheelchair.
Yeah, but he does have a special chair that he would
just
use
for sitting.
when he sits.
Yes.
He has a strap around the middle. And he has a wheelchair, and he has a walker, and he can sit and he can crawl very well. When he walks, it needs to be with assistance, and he almost always needs some supervision because his balance is not the best. So he does need someone who's supervising to make sure that he's safe. He's a really goofy kid, actually. He has a fantastic sense of humor, and he loves to laugh. So, there's always a lot of laughter with Eddie, and he is he's eager, he's curious, he's social, and I know I talked about at first wanting to being a really concerned about whether he would live, but there's a quality of life aspect to it too, and I'm happy to say that he has good quality of life. He goes to school. He goes to Renfrew Educational Services, which does special education, and they have not only the teacher but a team of therapists there, an occupational therapist, a physiotherapist, a speech therapist, who all work with him there. But in terms of the kind of care he needs help with most tasks. So from the time he gets up in the morning to when he goes to bed at night, he needs help with eating. Like he actually, he eats by mouth now, but he still has the G-tube in his stomach, which is just, if you imagine kind of the plastic stopper on the top of a beach ball, he has one inserted in his stomach, and we give him water 5 times a day through that because he doesn't tend to drink a lot.
Oh,
still.
I see.
But
so to keep him properly hydrated,
yes,
you need to use this, insert it through the tube.
Yes, and we hope soon we might not need to do that anymore.
Is he able to feed himself if he's being monitored, or do you have to put everything to his mouth?
He can feed himself, but he does need to be monitored.
I see.
And it's not all foods. He can't eat really hard foods, so his diet does need to be adjusted somewhat, but he can generally have what the family is having. And as long as he has someone who's supervising him with eating, he does fine. Sometimes he'll have peanut butter toast, and he puts too much in his mouth, so he needs to be reminded to slow down, take small bites, that kind of a thing. But he can feed himself. I see.
But there's always the risk or concern of choking because of the motor control issues.
Yes.
I see.
That skill has improved with time and should improve with time.
And is he able to walk on his own using the walker, or do you need to be also physically supporting him as he's using the walker?
So at home, we don't tend to use the walker because we have a small space. We live in a condo.
Yes.
He uses the walker at school, and he can generally do that on his own with some supervision.
I see.
So at home, he just kind of gets himself around, crawling, or if he wants to walk, I'll help him walk. And we'll use his wheelchair if he goes outside or goes any place that requires some distance as far as moving. If we go to the shopping mall, for example, he would be in his wheelchair.
Can you talk a bit about what are the challenges associated with that? And do you ever take transit using the wheelchair? And is that relatively accessible and easy, or what is it like getting around Calgary when you have a child who needs to be in the wheelchair?
I don't take transit with him.
Mm-hmm.
We have a vehicle where I can put the wheelchair in the back of it,
Mm-hmm.
and that would be how we tend to get around. Also, one thing that's really helpful is with Eddie's school that he attends Monday to Friday, the busing is door to door for the children. So the bus comes directly to our home, and he can get on the bus sitting in his wheelchair. And then they just kind of attach the wheelchair when he's on the bus so it can't move, and they take him directly to school. So that's helpful as far as transportation goes. I would say getting around is pretty good. I've kind of gotten used to just packing up the wheelchair and we all head out. And, Eddie is 7, so sometimes he has a mind of his own in terms of what he wants to do. And sometimes he doesn't feel like sitting in his wheelchair, so we have to work through that a bit. But generally, he's pretty cooperative, and we'll often just sit in his wheelchair, no problem, and then we'll go and do what we're going to do. He has developed the ability to wheel himself around. He's much stronger, so he has impressed me with how he can really get around himself, which does present a bit of a challenge at times. If I want to go one way and he wants to go another, he will just start moving with his wheelchair and have an idea about where he wants to go and kind of take off. And it's a bit of allowing him the freedom to have some independence, but at the same time sometimes we do need to go in a certain direction. So as with most children, just kind of working out that freedom versus balancing that with certain things I'm trying to do, or we're trying to do as a family. But we get around pretty well with the wheelchair. Some places aren't designed as well for wheelchairs. That can be a challenge, particularly older places.
Right.
It can be a little tough. So before I go someplace, I do try and think about the building. I've been surprised a couple of times, just thinking, okay, we'll go and do this, and then I kind of get there and it's not the most wheelchair friendly or accessible place.
Can you think of an example?
One place I'm thinking of is a bowling alley that only had stairs. It was an older bowling alley, and you could only use stairs to get down. So it was difficult to get, and the doorways were narrower, and it was difficult to get in and out of the building and get Eddie up and down the stairs. And now that he's 7, there's a challenge as far as being able to help him move around. At the age of 2, when he first got his wheelchair, it was easier, helping him move around, lifting him in and out, helping him walk around. And now he's bigger. Yeah. So it takes more strength. I would say there's very much a physical component to caring for Eddie.
Yes.
And we actually do have help. We have funding through the Alberta government for a support worker who does some hours with our family each week. And we'll do some personal care with Eddie, and also playing with him, because he does need help to be engaged in activities. It's not just a matter of him going over to the shelf, helping himself to a puzzle, taking it down, opening it up. He doesn't have all of these fine and gross motor skills. So he does need assistance with some of these tasks. And Eddie can sit in front of the TV for a while, but no parent wants their child staring blankly at the screen for hours. So we do have a support worker who can come, and she's wonderful. She engages with Eddie. She's wonderful with all the members of the family. And of course, Luke, being a typical child at the age of 11, he's quite independent, but he needs attention too. It's very important to balance him in this process and make sure he has time where the focus is on him.
Yeah. When you want to do something as like routine as going for groceries, routine for most people, how do you do that? Do you have to both go, you and Pete, together And because you can't just lift Eddie into a shopping cart, right? And you can't push a chair and a shopping cart at the same time. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, there are all these things. It really does change how daily life is lived. And I would say it slowed it down, maybe not necessarily in a bad way, but it really isn't about rushing from place to place and getting as much done as possible. It's about how is this process going to work, balancing out the needs in this family, finding a way to get it done. As far as grocery shopping goes, that's a great example. Right now, Pete tends to get the groceries. That's just the way it's working right now. On a weekly basis, he'll go on his own and sometimes invite the kids. And lately, they've said no. But I have gone with the kids at times, and I will put a bag on the back of Eddie's wheelchair, which obviously means I can't get a lot of groceries. But if I really need something, that's a way to do it. Or he actually has fit in the front of a shopping cart. He's smaller for a 7-year-old. And, Luke will come as well if I ask Luke to run ahead and get items, and there's a bit of a game where he gets to do a speed shop and he can run ahead and grab items. We might have a bit of a good time, but generally I've shifted from trying to get a lot done to trying to make the process more enjoyable and trying to consider, okay, if it's just me going, this is what I can do. If I bring Luke, this is what I can do. If I bring Luke and Eddie, this is what's possible. If I bring just Eddie, this is what it looks like. And just being willing to be flexible and adjustable. I know if I take Eddie grocery shopping, I need to think about what that's going to look like and not making it a big shop.
Yeah. Now, as you know, my wife and I have a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old. And we're exhausted much of the time. So where do you find the energy to not just have 2 kids, but also one that has these special needs?
I have been a parent of young children around that age, and I know there's an energy level that comes with that. My children are a little older now, 11 and 7. And with special needs, there's an energy level that comes with that. And where do any of us find the energy as parents? I don't know, other than we love our children. So and I think that's the driving force. I think being a parent, period, is hard. I think being the parent of a special needs child is hard and also rewarding, like being the parent of any child. And where do we find it? A day at a time. And for me, personally, I'm a spiritual person. I think there's something bigger than me that gives me strength and hope, and I try and stay connected to that.
You gave an example of a place that was quite difficult to access, the bowling alley. Are there some places that you guys like to go that you found quite easy to access?
Oh, yes. For example, the place we're in right now, the library, the Shaughnessy Y.
Yeah.
We love coming here. One of the things I was sad about when Eddie came home from the hospital, I love to swim and I love to take my kids swimming. And I felt like I lost that ability for a while because Eddie took some time to get back to good health. And Luke wasn't yet old enough to be super independent in the change room and the swimming pool as well. I don't think he was quite tall enough to be super, if I remember correctly. But I think the main thing as far as Luke went was kind of independence in the change room. But after a bit of time, we were able to come to the Y. I'd bring Eddie in his wheelchair and Luke would come as well, and we'd go to the change room, and Eddie was strong enough that it wasn't really difficult, like super difficult to get him ready for the pool. We'd go into the family change room and I would get Eddie ready, and then Luke could get himself ready and, get out to the pool and enjoy swimming. And that was a tremendous gift to get back. But I did lose the ability to do that safely for a while. I wasn't able to bring both kids and safely take them for a swim on my own. But I really treasure those kinds of moments, because when Eddie was very sick and in the hospital, we just didn't have those times. And of course with COVID as well, which created so much isolation and lack of opportunity to get out and get together and be in public spaces. I just treasure all of these moments of being healthy and being able to enjoy getting out to places like the Y or the movie theater. The movie theater in Shaughnessy is a wonderful space for Eddie to go wheeling around. We went to the Olympic Oval recently. We went skating, Kids Cancer Care, which is a wonderful organization, had a couple of skating nights recently, and it was great how they adapted the activity for all kids. And Eddie had a little sled and they pushed him around on the ice, and Luke got skates. So I am so appreciative when people take those extra steps to make it possible for all children to participate. And there are some inclusive playgrounds in Calgary that were recently built, and we really enjoyed those. It's amazing for us to go as a family to the playground and Eddie can just play. It's not difficult for him to play. And I really think all children should just be able to be children. And I have a memory of being in this building and going around with Eddie in the wheelchair, and we passed the rinks and there were people skating out there, and he said to me, "Can I do that?" And I said to him, yes, because I knew there must be a way for him to get on the ice. Like there must be some, I know he can't get out there on skates, but there must be some way for him to enjoy that experience, even if it's not the traditional experience you think of. And that was recently at the Oval, where, you know, they found a sled for him and Eddie could be out on the ice, and it was just so joyful.
And regarding playgrounds, some people might be aware that Calgary's built a bunch of very inclusive playgrounds where folks with disabilities can also use them, kids with disabilities can also use them, such as here in Somerset, very close to where we are right now. There's one of those fully accessible playgrounds. And with my 4-year-old who has normal physical abilities, it still adds an extra level of fun and adventure, the fact that there are these novel structures to play on, you know? So it benefits everybody, not just the parents who have a special needs child, but any child gets to benefit. Every person gets to benefit from these cool structures they're building.
And I love to see that. That is just keeping all children in mind. And I've been to that same playground a lot during the summer. And even into the fall and winter here, we've visited. It's just this incredible space. And as a parent, I feel so grateful. Like, thank you for thinking of my child. And thank you for thinking of all children. So it's not just set up for my child, but it's set up for all children. Like you said, it's just a wonderful place that all children can enjoy.
So you painted a picture of his challenges with mobility now and with eating, but can you tell me a little bit more about what his verbal abilities are like now and his cognitive abilities? How well is he able to communicate?
He communicates quite well. If you know him, you can pretty much understand what he's saying, but if you don't know him, you kind of need to get used to the way he pronounces certain words. Sometimes, even as parents, Pete and I have some difficulty understanding what he's saying, so he has a letter board and he will spell words. He's very gifted at reading and spelling. He can read through books, I would say appropriate to his age, and certainly a very good speller as well. So, you know, verbally doing well. Cognitively, he's a smart kid, and he does have a learning disability, but you know, certainly can grasp a lot. And in terms of being able to communicate with others, he can use words and speak in short sentences. One thing I miss is that when he comes home from school, an open-ended question like, what did you do today doesn't really work. He's never going to launch into a story. The questions have to be more direct. Did you go to the gym or did you go outside today? And then he can, tell me. And sometimes I need to rely a bit more on what the teachers tell me what was going on, or even the support worker who works with us at home with Eddie. She also works in his classroom. So there's some communication there in terms of what he was doing during the day. But I have felt at times some sadness that I don't get to hear the lengthy stories and the colorful language that comes with a really overflowing verbal ability. And yet I am very connected with Eddie as his parent. I have a good sense of his day. We participate in activities. He is able to communicate. So there's a lot of richness there. I felt some sadness the other day because I saw there was a child in our neighborhood who was just running over to another child's house, knocking on the door and let's play. And my son, like Eddie, has that same desire to play with his friends, but it's not that easy for him just to leave the house and go to his friend's door and knock on the door and say, let's play. What I did with Eddie the other day was I took him on a 20-minute walk, because it took us 20 minutes to walk what would normally be a 5-minute walk for a child. And I walked with him, and he went to a friend's door and he knocked on the door, and the friend came, and Eddie asked him to come over to our place to play some Minecraft. And I was really proud that he got that sentence out, because that's an accomplishment for Eddie to speak that kind of a sentence. And his friend said, yeah, I'll come tomorrow. And it was like a big deal. His friend showed up the next day, but we need to arrange opportunities. It's not so easy for him to just go and do things on his own, but he can absolutely do things with some support. And he does love to be independent, when he can. And as his mom, I need to learn about stepping back. And actually with both of my children, they've given me feedback about wanting to be more independent. So that will come as they continue to grow. But the reality is that Eddie does need some support in areas that most 7-year-old children would not. And I'm happy we're able to give that to him.
And I mean, it is incredible, like this tumor, whether it was 4 or 5 centimeters or whatever. The point is, it was a fast-growing one, and it was quite large at the point that, I mean, obviously 4 or 5 centimeters, if that's the correct number, is large for, especially in a small 2.5-year-old child. And I believe at the time, I remember one time in the hospital, you told me that they said maybe 20 years ago this would not be survivable.
Yeah.
That it's amazing how far the technology had come, the knowledge had come that they could operate and have a recovery like this. Yeah,
I remember doctors telling us that, it wasn't always like this. If Eddie had had that kind of a tumor years ago, they might have come to us and said, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. But with advances in research and treatment, they were able to help him and save his life. And I remember another doctor telling me, you're lucky to be here in Canada. So we were living in Calgary when all of this happened, and we had this immediate access to the children's and everything they have to offer. And then all of the professionals who've worked with us since. We've really had a lot of people assisting us. And just to go back for a second here, I mentioned when we left the hospital at the end of August 2018, they saw something on the MRI and they weren't sure if it was cancer or not. And the following months, because I think we did an MRI every 3 months after that, the following months did show that it was not cancer, it was not growing. So we did get that information eventually, but we left with that uncertainty and then needed to continue with the MRIs that are now on an annual basis. And like I said, January 2018 is the 5-year point, 5 years after Eddie's diagnosis. And then August 2023 would be 5 years in remission. And they said they may not do MRIs after that point.
Wow, yeah.
So it feels good to be making this kind of progress. I'm very aware that the story does not always go this way for all families. And one source of support I've had over the years is being connected with some other parents and families. And there are so many different stories involving cancer. Each story is unique. And ups and downs along the way. And I am just so grateful that Eddie is in good health.
So this is a really big question, Sue, but how do you think this whole experience, these past 5 years have affected you and your husband, Pete? How has it changed you? You said you've always been spiritual, but I imagine that has been a source of strength for you, and has only strengthened that.
Yes.
What are some other ways that this experience has changed the two of you?
Such a big question.
Have you surprised yourself by how much strength you've been able to draw upon?
Yes. I think one thing I've learned is we have the capacity to surprise ourselves in terms of what we're capable of when there's a strong enough reason for it. And even though this journey has not been easy by any stretch, there has always been a strong sense of purpose. I've never doubted the love I have for my kids and my family, and that's been a large enough purpose to make this worth it. One thing I say to Eddie at night is when I put him to bed, and I say this pretty much every night to him, is that he's a precious child of God, and that I love him, and I'll walk this entire journey with him every step. So it's a really wonderful thing to have that kind of love and that kind of faith in someone, knowing that willingness to walk a journey with someone, no matter where it goes, is there. And I think almost any parent, you would talk to would have that sense of overwhelming love. And I never knew all of this was in store for our family, obviously, but wherever the twists and turns have taken us, I've never doubted the purpose of it. I think I wouldn't have been able to do it if the purpose had not seemed so important, but I can't imagine anything more purposeful than giving my kids a full life, not just getting by, but giving them a childhood and then the chance to become teenagers and then adults. And perhaps my older child may or may not have a more typical path through life. For Eddie, I just have a lot of questions about what it might look like for him when he grows older. But I am reassured by the wonderful boy that he is, that he can have a meaningful life, with relationships and real purpose. So as a parent, I feel really honored to have experienced what I have, although I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And I just think it's amazing how I don't believe in fate or that things are necessarily predetermined, but I do believe that all things can be used for good. And I feel determined, especially for the sake of my children, to find the good in this, because we've had to accept the bad. We've had to accept the suffering. So I feel really determined to be open to whatever good can be here. And for my son, Eddie, I saw him suffer, like really suffer. And as a parent, that's the worst helpless feeling. So I feel like if that has needed to be part of his life, then I want to be part of making that mean something and making it, turning it into just whatever good can be out here for him now. Like that is a chapter that he needed to live through, he needed to recover from, and now I just want to see him get better. I want to see him be happy. I want to see him have opportunities. I want to see him make a difference in other people's lives, just like any other person.
Well, I've known you for 25 years, Sue, and I've always admired your strength and your kindness and compassion, and I'm honored that you would share all of this with me and to be willing to share it with others. And I want, as a final question, I just want any listeners to understand why you were open to sharing such personal and painful experiences and memories. And I want them to understand it's not just because someone who's been a close friend of yours for 25 years has asked you if you would be willing to do this, but I want them to understand that you wanted to do this, and if you could explain why you were willing to share such personal and painful things.
Well, for example, one thing that got me through the past few years, particularly the most difficult times, was the ability to genuinely connect with others. There's such power in that. So I feel that when others have opened themselves up to me and been authentic and genuine and coming from a good place and wanting to help and being willing to share their stories, I've drawn so much strength from that. I feel like I want to be part of that energy and that sharing and share my own story when it is helpful. So when an opportunity comes along to speak to people and speak to them in an honest and heartfelt way, I think that's kind of what we're all here for.
Well, thank you, Sue. You're a generous spirit and a wonderful person.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I enjoyed it.